I'd like to especially thank the panelists for joining early enough. We don't take it for granted, and we say a very big thank you to you. I would also like to say a very big thank you to members of the audience that have joined. I mean, we know that a lot more people will still join, but you've taken the efforts to join really early and start the webinar with us. And so I say a very big thank you to you. To start, let me just say welcome to everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Navigating the Startup Funding Journey. My name is Olumide, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. I mean, there's no gainsaying the fact that funding is the lifeblood of any startup. Without it, clearly startups will die. And I'm sure that a lot of people who operate in the tech space will be familiar with the statistic that 90% of all startups fail more often than not because they've run out of cash. And the questions that we want to answer today revolve around how do you get funding for your startup, for instance? What are the best sources and strategies to attract investors? How do you, as a startup founder, pitch your idea to convince investors, institutional or otherwise, to back you? To answer some of those questions, we have curated a faculty of outstanding professionals who have the experience required to answer those questions. In no particular order, we have Mr. Soyombo, Mr. Olumide Soyombo. We have Mrs. Ireayo Oladunjoye. We have Mrs. Seun Ali and Mr. Oswald Guobadia. And I'll just take the next few minutes to run through their profiles. Taking first Mr. Olumide Soyombo. Mr. Olumide Soyombo is an experienced angel investor and founder with a portfolio of nearly 40 African tech startups, including Mono, Piggyvest, Split, Migo, TeamApt, and Paystack, raising over $70 million, ranging from pre-seed to Series A. Before launching the Pan-African VC firm, Voltron Capital, Mr. Soyombo co-founded Blue Chip Technologies in 2008, offering data warehousing solutions and enterprise applications to banks, telcos, and insurance firms across Lagos, Accra, Lusaka, Nairobi, and the DRC. Additionally, he co-founded LeadPath Nigeria in 2014, an early-stage firm and accelerator. Mr. Soyombo holds a BSc in Systems Engineering from the University of Lagos, Nigeria, and an MSc in Business and Information Technology from the Aston Business School. Beyond his professional roles, he is an author and serves on the advisory boards of several companies. And I invite the audience to join me in welcoming Mr. Olumide Soyombo to our webinar today. Next, I will read through Mrs. Oladunjoye's profile. Mrs. Ireayo Oladunjoye is the Managing Director and CEO of Endeavour in Nigeria. In a role, she leverages her years of private and public sector working experience to support entrepreneurs in various life cycle stages with interventions and resources that enable them to scale their businesses and create societal behavioral change. She previously led the startups unit at the LSETF, that's the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, where she was responsible for developing and implementing a slate of government-led programs to enable the tech ecosystem in the States. Mrs. Oladunjoye is a trained engineer from the City University London and completed the Women's Leadership Program at Oxford University Side Business School. Please welcome Mrs. Ireayo Oladunjoye and say a very warm happy birthday to her, as today is Mrs. Oladunjoye's birthday. Next, I will just briefly read through Mr. Guobadia's profile. Mr. Oswald Guobadia is a seasoned technology and business transformation leader with over 25 years of impactful experience in private and public sectors across Africa and the USA. Mr. Guobadia was a senior special assistant on digital transformation to President Muhammadu Buhari and drove the groundbreaking Nigerian Startup Act, shaping the nation's tech ecosystem. He also co-founded DBH Africa, a market leader in West African infrastructure. Mr. Guobadia holds a master's in telecoms and computer science and a bachelor's degree in biology. His thought leadership shines through his authored publications, and he champions innovations and entrepreneurship as a board member at Edo Innovates. Beyond his professional commitments, he serves on multiple advisory boards like ChipLab, JEGO, and Block. A very warm welcome to you, sir, Mr. Oswald Guobadia. Last but definitely not the least, Mrs. Seun Ali is the CEO and co-founder at First Delivery Company Limited, a last-mile delivery technology platform in Nigeria. Prior to First Delivery, Mrs. Ali spent more than a decade at Fidelity and First Bank, where she started from a youth service to managing organizational structure at the latter. She started First Delivery out of a personal experience in 2018. Today, First Delivery helps the likes of Kuda, Opay, Flutterwave, Moneypoint, Dang, Sterling Bank, Wema Bank, Guinness Nigeria, Red Bull, Mo Organics, and much more to fulfill their last mile delivery promises to their customers. First Delivery is backed by Ventures Platform, Google, Techstars, Acacia, and Voltron. Please join me to welcome Mrs. Seun Ali to the webinar. Once again, a very big thank you to the panelists. And without further ado, I'm just going to get right into the questions so as to save our time. My first question will be directed to you, Mrs. Oladunjoye. And the question is this. The statistics that Nigeria has the most number of startups in Africa, and that we are the ones who, well, we are the one who has raised the most monies amongst or within the tech ecosystem in Africa. But in such a competitive market where we have, quite a number of startups looking for funds, what suggestions will you offer to founders sort of to help them distinguish their startup and make it stand out to potential investors?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. So if I start off with it, you reeled out some statistics of what the current climate looks like in terms of funding. So I would say what you want to be doing right now is making sure that you're profitable. That would be attractive to investors. When you're going to investors, you want to make sure you also have an experienced team. Without an experienced team, I won't be backing with my money. Have a clear distinction in your value proposition and what distinguishes you from other startups or businesses that are similar to yours, because nothing is new under the sun. So if you're in fintech, what makes you different from the forward-running fintech company in the market you're in? Showing that you have good knowledge of your market, you have traction. I alluded to that, not just traction, but you want to be profitable. You're scalable, because if I'm investing, I want to return on my investment. So how am I going to make money? Show me a pathway as to how I'm going to get the return on my investment, and showing that you have risk mitigation in mind. So you're thinking of what the regulations are around whatever business you're running, and that you have thought through it and you have plans around. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mrs. Oladunjoye. I mean, you did mention something around risk mitigation. That sounds like an interesting point, but I'm just going to note it down. Hopefully, I can come back to it before if we don't run out of time.
Okay.
Mr. Soyombo.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sir. Over the years, fintech has recorded great successes, and I mean, they are our biggest success stories. We talk about Paystack, we talk about Flutterwave. My question is just, I'm aware that there are also other fields. There's prop tech, there's health tech, but in your view and in your experience, are there other industries that have such great potential that founders should be focusing on, and not just everybody going into fintech? If the answer to that is in the affirmative, I would then say there should be a rider, and it's that. Can you please help us just shed a little bit of light on why those industries are key and why founders should consider them?
Again, thank you again for having me. I think what we are seeing in our market is, and first and foremost, is there are problems everywhere, right? And those become interesting opportunities to build scalable companies. There are problems in the health tech space. There are problems in the logistics space. There are problems in the education space. There are problems in every facet of, and that's the beauty about building in Africa, right? Those challenges then become opportunities for entrepreneurs to tackle. Predominantly, you have seen funding going into the fintech space because you have seen founders build in that space first. And then what then happens is, so if you look at MoneyPoint today, person worked with InterSwitch, a fintech company. When he's going to build, he's most likely going to build a company in that fintech space because he has noticed some gaps and he wants to build out in that area. Or you look at Mono, right? Abdul worked with Paystack. He had seen some problems in that space. And then he's going to then build companies likely in that same industry. And obviously receive funding because he has some domain expertise. So investors back domain expertise first, right? And back the people first. So what you'll see as the ecosystem matures is once we're able to back some very interesting companies, so for example, Fez, that we've backed, a high growth engineer or a nice product manager working in Fez in the next couple of years would find some interesting things that he thinks Fez is not doing or that they can do, or find some insights, and then we'll build something again in the logistics space. And that's what you see also in the health tech space and so on. So the dominance of the fintech space is because traditionally that's where certain founders have gone ahead to build. But for me, I think that every space around the ecosystem and the continent is very interesting, like I said, because we have huge problems everywhere. And you then find that those problems become opportunities that entrepreneurs then go ahead to tackle. So like I said, it could be health tech, it could be, there's friction everywhere, there's non-consumption everywhere. And those are the things that entrepreneurs and investors want to back and bring to market.
Thank you very much for that. Mrs. Ali, first, let me say big congratulations for getting into Techstars, the 2022 cohort. Congratulations for that. And I know that it's not exactly easy to get into Techstars. So my question is, can you just shed a little bit of light on what that journey entailed? How, getting into Techstars, what would you say you did right, so to speak?
Thank you very much, Oladunjoye, and thank you to the entire team for having me. I'll start by saying that, first of all, we didn't have everything figured out. Mm-hmm. So it's fine as a founder, as an individual, not to have everything figured out. But it's very, very important. It's even more important to have an open mind and to be willing to learn along the line. But I'll summarize our own learnings and what we did into 5 main points very quickly. One, I think Madam MD had touched on some of them when she was talking. First of all, you want to have a very clear value proposition. You cannot even sell what you don't believe in, what you don't even understand yourself. So as a founder, you need to understand what it is that you're selling, have a very clear value proposition, be able to communicate that value to everyone around you, to your investors, even your employees. People have to buy into that vision before they can even believe in that vision before they can buy into it. Secondly, you have to, and again, don't forget, you don't have to have everything figured out. It's very important to have a very solid business model. Investors want to understand how they are going to, how your business generates money. It has to be very realistic and data-driven as well. So for us at Fez, we have 3 models. We make money from individuals, we make money from businesses, and we make money from aggregators. And that was how we communicated to our potential investors at that time. Third, team. Investors invest in people, not even the businesses. They're investing in you as an individual. So it is very important that you put together a solid team who understand what you, who buy into the vision, are willing to make sacrifices to ensure that that startup grows. For me, I'd worked previously in the banking sector as Fidelity Bank, First Bank. I was director of operations at OPay. I had a very brief stint as director of operations at Move Africa. I was also the chief operating officer at Block. So all of my experiences over the years put together was also, I made sure that I spoke to that. My co-founder is CTO. He literally built the we defined some of the processes for First Bank as a technology person. And so this just me sharing our own experience. As raw as it is. So your team strength is very important. And second to the last, due diligence readiness. It is very, very important that you have documents put together as founders. Again, don't forget, you don't have to have everything figured out. Ask questions, be open-minded, but you need legal documents, regulatory documents, like Madam had mentioned earlier as well. Just so that when investors ask you for all of these things, you have something, and it doesn't have to be perfect. They are also there. They can, a lot of them will guide you to say, okay, this is not perfect enough. Can you correct and all of that? And finally, building relationships. For instance, we got Ventures platform to invest in that because Voltron, Olumide Soyombo introduced us to them, right? So building relationships, I think, is very critical. And even when investors don't tell you yes the first day, it is fine to maintain those relationships with them, because it can be useful later on. Somebody also introduced us to Techstars just from PBN, a financial technology group that we have on WhatsApp. So yeah, these are some of the things. There's a lot more, but these are some of the things that worked with us at first, and I hope that it will be useful to other people.
Thank you so very much, ma'am. But just before I move on from you, you did mention that, or one of the things that you mentioned was the strength of your team. And to drive that point home, you said investors invest in the people, not necessarily the product. I'm thinking to myself, is there hope for a solo founder who's coming from relative obscurity?
Absolutely. Again, it is the person. And at the end, I would let the investors on this call speak to that how do they make these decisions? But I know they are very intuitive. They also make data-driven decisions as well. But if you're a solo founder who's got what it takes to sell what you're, to pitch your business, communicate it clearly to an investor who definitely believes in you, why not? So I don't think it's about being a solopreneur or co-founding a business. It's about you as an individual, how well you know your market, how well you believe in what you're building, and how well you're able to sell it and convince somebody to come on board with you.
Thank you so very much.
I'm going to start investing now. I'm going to call Seun to start investing. I'm making that one our investor call.
That's very well. Okay, Mr. Guobadia, you played a pivotal role in birthing the Startup Act, and there's some lofty ideas in the Act that I'm sure anyone who plays in this space has already, they've looked up and they're ready to participate in the Startup Investment Seed Fund, for instance. Can you speak a little bit to how startups or founders can benefit from the Startup Investment Seed Fund? And this is in light of the fact that, at least as of now, to the best of my knowledge, the portal has not yet been launched, so to speak. So is there something that founders can do to take benefits of the fund at this time?
So, hello, thanks for having me, this distinguished panel. I would say off the bat, the answer to that is no at this given time. I think what founders should be doing in this period is embracing the Act, understanding the Act, and then ultimately demanding for implementation of the Act. But the Act remains unimplemented. Interestingly enough, I got a call yesterday from a founder that I know quite well. And his question was, how can you get tax waivers as per the Act? And my response was, it's not implemented yet. But that now brought the question of what is law, right? It's not implemented, what is law? Now, you guys are lawyers, and you know exactly how you go about, forcing the hand of government to implement laws that are beneficial to, a certain sector. I think in this given moment, what's important is that the beneficiaries understand the act, understand the benefits of the act, and drive for the implementation of the act. The seed funding in the act is quite small. One of the things we said about the act is that we didn't particularly draw funding into the document itself, but we definitely did attach ourselves to a number of, serve as the gateway to a number of other funding. So if you listen to the recent conversation about the IDICE fund to tech and creative, a big part of the process will be an advantage to be a labeled startup within the Nigerian Startup Act to be able to go into that IDICE funding for startups. And there are a number of other funds and a lot of other funders that will also look at your labeling status as sort of a due diligence to drive their understanding of what you do as a starting point to invest in you. But if you look at the act as a whole, you see there's a lot of incentives in there to drive behavior. If it's incentives to drive listing on the Nigerian Stock Exchange as a way to get liquidation into your company, if it's the tax benefits to angel investors, if it's the tax benefits to foreign investors, as in giving them incentives to keep the funds in country, and they're incentivized to do that. There are a number of things in the act that drive the idea of supporting local investors to ensure that we're able to now start generating local funds to invest in our startups. So the act is generally about creating an environment. And I think, as earlier mentioned by Olumide, the idea of non-consumption, the idea of market creating innovation, we're a bit behind on that because what we're doing is a lot of efficiency, innovative type companies. And, I just keep it very simple and say real problems versus problems, right? So we're solving problems. Have we now got into the real problems? And then we'll find that, beyond funding, what we have as an issue is also the environment being very difficult. And that's one of the things the Nigerian Startup Act comes to address, right? The policy, the regulation, and the environmental issues that will allow our startups to grow and thrive. Because, those of us who have done startups in Nigeria, we know that even if you have the money, you can still die. So I'll stop there for now.
That's very well. Thank you so very much. I'm still going to take you up subsequently around engaging with the government, and that's something we'll get to subsequently. But let me quickly go back to you, Mr. Soyombo, and say a very, very big congratulations to you on the release of your book. If you are a founder on this call and you have not read Mr. Soyombo's book, I don't know what you're doing. Now, let me say this here, because he did put the caveats in the book. He says he's not there to teach you anything. He's just telling his own story. So yeah, maybe he's not there to teach you anything, but I have read the book, and I'm telling you that if you know you really want to go far, I would recommend that you get the book and read. But Mr. Soyombo, there's something that, and amongst the many gems that's contained in the book, one thing that stood out for me is where you mentioned that people need to find their advantage and to leverage on that advantage to achieve what they want to. But I'm here thinking to myself, what happens to, or in the case of a founder who's saying to himself, I don't have an advantage, I'm not coming from, this kind of family, or I don't have these kinds of friends or something. What would you like to say to such a person or such a founder who thinks that they don't have anything to leverage on at the start?
I think the whole idea of that is starting from where you are, and I think that's the key message. That there's some leverage that you have. To think you have nothing is to have nothing, right? Starting from a point of is it talent? I've built some subject matter expertise in a special area. I don't need to have money first and foremost to start, but have credibility, right? And that kind of founder with that credibility and that subject matter expertise can then approach funders or investors to back him or her. Because you see, at the end of the day, right, and I say this very often, that investors back people, and for investors to take a risk on you, you should have also been able to take a risk on yourself, right? You can't be working in Zenith Bank or GT Bank and saying, okay, I will leave the job when I raise funding for this company and I'll be building this thing on the side, right? If you're not ready to risk, why should I take a risk on you? So you have something in the sense that you have some domain expertise that's your advantage over others, that then gives you the leverage to go into certain conversations. So the point then becomes, yes, you're not necessarily, yes, you don't have a family that can maybe invest in you first and foremost, but you do have, and I always say to people that investors are not doing you any favor. I'm not giving you money because I like your face, right? Or because you went to the same school with me or whatever, right? It's not a favor, it's an exchange of value. And the investor is backing you because the investor believes that you can build something tangible, and you have something tangible to give, and you're going to build a sizable business. And that's really how I say things. You have to start from where you are, as it were, right, to be able to then move forward. And it usually starts with the person. What subject matter expertise do you have? What research have you done? What have you built before? Even before money, all those things become very important.
Thank you very much, sir. And I hope that everyone is learning that you don't necessarily have to have anything in that sense. But if you have subject matter expertise, you have domain expertise, start from where you are. Thank you for that. Mrs. Oladunjoye, I just want to ask, what are some practices in your view and from where you sit that you see that some startups seeking funding, which in your view discourages funders from investing in them? What are those things that you've seen that stand out as a red flag to you?
Thank you so much for the question. I'll say that there's several. So if I start with, for instance, you're going to an investor with a misaligned object, like your misaligned mission. So if you're an agri-tech and you're going to an investor that does not invest in agri-tech, already is showing of the business or the founders of the business. I think MD Fez had made mention of it. Yes, and you dug into the question where oftentimes you might find that investors don't mind investing in single founders, but then they're very, very conscious, or it's sensitive, is a red flag, because when you have single founder dependencies. So if you can show me that your team can carry your vision for you, and it's not only you, like you're not carrying the whole matter of your business on your head, then maybe. I'll say when you have inexperienced team is a red flag. You need to be learnable and teachable. That's the word. So you don't have to know everything, or I'll say go into the room knowing that you don't know everything, and you're open to mentorship, you're open to coaching, you're open to, and I mean most founders that are surviving in the ecosystem are those that pivot, meaning that you're listening to what the market wants. So if you're uncoachable, they can't mentor you. You're so sold on your solution as opposed to the problem you're trying to solve. It discourages investors. When you don't have a clear business model, or you don't have a clear path to profitability, a clear path to showing me as an investor how I'm going to get my money back. Like Olumide made mention, we're not giving you money. Nobody's giving you money because they like you or because you're friends. At least nobody, like your angel investors, even when they're giving you money, it's because they believe in you and they believe in the business that you're actually about to embark on. I'll say, if there's a misalignment in your target audience, or you don't understand the market, you don't understand. Some people have a business and they think it's, for instance, you might think it's a food business, but it's actually a logistic business and you can't see it. When you have a misalignment in actually what you're actually doing and what you're offering the investors, it becomes a problem. You also have founders that have a great idea, but they don't know how to sell the market. At this point, you should know that you should have, found a co-founder that believes in your vision and your mission and can sell your market for you. You're not a be all and end all of everything in terms of the business. You want to show that you can collaborate, you can find partners to ensure that your business grows. If there's a lack of transparency with your financials is a problem, lack of governance structure in your business is a problem. And then we have a lot of this where you think your valuation is bigger than what it really is, and you have unrealistic exit expectations. That's a red flag for an investor. I mean, I can go on and on in terms of what red flags are. When you have disorganized or uncoordinated, investors will be like not to buttress it. You're investing in the people behind the business. When you have uncoordinated or founders, one founder is going one way, the other one is going another way. The founding team's dynamics are not great. It creates a red flag for investors. But I'll leave it so I don't take up all the time and going down the rabbit hole of practices that are bad. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. And you're very correct. I mean, this is something that we can go on and on about. Mr. Soyombo, is there anything you would like to add to this? I mean, because from where you also sit, what are those things that once you spot, you say, about Mr. Soyombo? Okay, I'm not sure if he is with us.
Sorry, I lost my connection for a second. Please go on.
Yes, sir. So we just wanted you to also chime in on what red flags you see, or what things you see and you deem to be red flags in founders who are seeking funding.
There are plenty. I can. How long do you have?
If you could just summarize it for us, please.
I think lack of teachability, right? I think teachability and coachability have become very, very important. And I've seen that many times some of the investments that have gone bad in hindsight, when you look back and see and do your postmortem, right, you get to see that that malleability and coachability was not there from that founder. That's usually the big first step, right? I mean, you must be dogged about what you're building as an entrepreneur. Every entrepreneur believes what they're building and has to be dogged about it. But you also be malleable in the light of new information and be able to take things from people without dismissing them. That chutzpah of I know it all, right, seems to be the one big indicator that I see. Secondly is attitude towards money. Obviously, you see, I go to a club and I see a founder busting 5 bottles of champagne, chilling with baddies. That's a big problem already, right? Not saying that you shouldn't enjoy yourself, but if you eat your fruit before the harvest comes, then obviously there's a big problem. I think personality-wise and lifestyle-wise, those matters. And then, like I said, level of coachability also matters. What we also don't do very, very well here in Nigeria is that we don't go back, especially even in Africa, we don't go back to look at some of the failures and what happens, right? And you find that once I stop getting updates from the founder, I already start knowing something is wrong, right? Once the updates become irregular, you can start telling, there's a big telltale sign that this company is probably going south in a few more months. But you can also understand the thinking of the founder. The founder is thinking, it will be better next month. Let me just wait till next month and I'll send that report. And the next month comes and like, oh, I'm almost there. I'll send it again next month, right? And that's the optimism that you have to have as an entrepreneur anyway. But that same optimism can hit you if you don't manage the optimism well, in the sense that if you still share those updates, even when things are not going well, because there might be some insights that some investor would have that might be able to help you turn things around, right? Instead of you going at it at yourself. Secondly, like I said, in terms of lack of postmortem, you find that many companies we've invested in, you only find out that the company has died when you see that you go on LinkedIn and see the guy is working in GTB, right? You didn't even know that the company was dead already. So we don't go back have to say what really happened here, right? What lessons can we learn from these same things? And I think once we do that, it forms a form of mental model that helps us build some of these same red flags. From one top of my head, those are the things I would say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Soyombo. I see questions have started rolling in, and I'm just going to ask members of the audience to send all the questions at this time so that when we're done with the questions we have, we can just take them right away without wasting any further time. So if you have more questions or any other person who has questions, please just send them using the Q&A option. Let me go to you, Mrs. Ali, and this also piggybacks off something that Mrs. Oladunjoye had mentioned. It's around, she had talked about preparing your documentation, legal, and all of that. And so what I just want to say is, what advice will you give to startups who are seeking funding on how to prepare for investor pitches and the due diligence process effectively? What advice do you have for those founders?
So thank you very much for that question. First thing first is practice. I mean, for me, and I'm going to be sharing a lot of, sharing my experience. Last year was the first time ever that I'll pitch. Last year, March, was the first time that I'll ever have to stand in front of people and tell them what we do. The pitch was supposed to last for 3 minutes. I literally shook the entire, I couldn't even communicate effectively because I was so nervous. I knew what I wanted to say, but again, maybe because of, there's also the fear of, oh my God, would I be able to tell it the way they need to see it? So as a founder, it's very important that first of all, believe in yourself, understand what you're selling, and practice, rehearse it over time. But again, most of the time, you can't even give what you don't have. So it's very important that even as an individual, you take out time to document what exactly you want to tell. First of all, you want to talk about the problem that you're solving. And Mr. Guobadia had already mentioned today the difference between the problem and the real problems, right? So you want to focus on the real problems that you're solving as a founder and communicate it effectively. You want to also be able to, you want to be confident about your traction. That's what a lot of founders don't do. We don't do it so much. Talk about your traction, show your progress, let people identify with you, let people, I've done it before, and that's the leverage that Otumba had mentioned earlier as well. Tell it as it is, let them know that what you've done and what you can do. If you receive the additional support, whether that's in form of technical assistance or funding that you intend to get as well. I think another thing that is very, very important to do as founders is that never, ever overlook your competitions. Investors would always ask you that question. Who else is offering the same thing, doing the same thing that you're doing? You can't just be only you. So as a founder, be clear of, be aware of the alternatives that exist, and be very, very sure of how different you are as a startup, how you're solving that problem differently from what your competitions are doing. I think as well, in terms of financials as well, so beyond the traction, you want to, oftentimes, even when I also got a few rejections as well, it was because of maybe the financials were not clear, it was weak. It doesn't mean that it wasn't correct, but maybe the assumptions were wrong, and the data were not substantial enough. So as founders, you want to pay very good attention, very good sound attention to your financial projections, and make sure that your assumptions are correct, are realistic, most importantly, and you'll be good.
Thank you very much for that, madam. That was clear. If I was a founder, I would say that I was 60% there. Thank you so much for that. Mr. Guobadia, I want to ask, pardon me, but I want to go back to the act, the Startup Act. And the question that I want to ask is, what are the most significant, and you also touched on this earlier when you spoke, what are the most significant opportunities that the Act presents for startups or for the startup funding landscape? And in your view, how can or what can founders do to leverage on those opportunities?
Okay, so that's sort of asked and answered to some extent. So, I mean, what's interesting about our environment that we all know, and I think the founders here and the policymakers / ecosystem builders here have already stated, is that, you know, doing a startup in Nigeria is a very difficult thing. Running a business in Nigeria is a very difficult thing. And that's one of the reasons why we can't even get to our real problems, because you need to have an environment to sustain that founder to be able to develop that solution for the real problems. So what we tend to have is we try to solve problems that we can see, you know, we can easily fund and can easily see the ROI back end to some extent. Olumide just said something that was pretty interesting, as well as the lady from Fez. You know, it's a difficult process. I mean, Olumide said something about GTB Bank. I have a story about a founder that I was funding, and this founder said he needed a break. So he took a break, went back to the States for a little bit. No problem, he'll be back soon, and then we'll get back to building this business. And then I think maybe a year or two went by. He sends a picture and he had a NASA rocket behind him. So in essence, my founder found it difficult to start a business in Nigeria, but is now a NASA engineer. And he's working on rockets. The rocket was about to take off that weekend from Florida. So that gives you a sense of how difficult the environment is. Now, to bring that back to your question about the Nigerian Startup Act. Nigerian Startup Act, as I tell people, about 99% of the provisions in the Act were put there by private sector folks, by startups, by founders, by funders, to try to create that enabling environment. So the answer is that every single provision in that Act is intended to help make the environment easier to operate in, to make the environment easier to start in, and to make the environment easier to thrive in, right? So it's critical that, once again, I've already said, it's critical for us all as founders, funders, to ecosystem builders, to understand what the Act is attempting to do and demand its implementation, because you are the beneficiaries of the Act. It's the only way to do it. I mean, we have, you know, if you look between the Nigerian Startup Act and the Better Business Act that was also passed, those two acts, you know, put together, create an environment that actually helps startups build their businesses. And I maintain, you know, I know the conversation is about funding, but I will maintain that it's not just funding. You can have the funding and just one policy document that is not being signed in your favor at any agency, insert agency of your choice, will wipe out your runway, and you'll be, you know, you would have run out the funds, and you have to tell your investors that you never got started because you were trying to get a regulator to create the sandbox for you to develop your idea. So it's important that we also are very concerned, you know, about how we develop the environment, how we develop the ecosystem. A healthy ecosystem is one where the policymaker and the private sector folks are partnered in ensuring that the policies are forward-thinking, the regulations make sense, you know, and the laws in place support us building a business, right? So if you look at one of the issues about why are all our startups of note are all Delaware companies, hey, I don't mind it. I'm in Delaware right now, right? So I enjoy the tax benefits of all these companies being funded in Delaware. So don't continue, but continue. Thank you very much. You know, you have to look at the issue with case law. We don't have the case law, and we don't have our IP and trademarks are not in a way where people who are bringing money from the foreign domains will feel comfortable, you know, subjecting their funds, you know, their resources to our legal lack of case law and our legal processes and our lack of IP strength and framework. So that's sort of where we need to start, right? You start looking about, you know, start looking at issues around, I know I've gone past your question, but let me just wrap up with this. You know, start looking at issues of what is the real market, right? So recently I've really been fascinated myself with the idea of total addressable markets versus the real market. And the fact that, you know, data inclusion and digital literacy and digital inclusion play a very big part in increasing, you know, our TAM, right? If we say we have 200 million people, but 80% or 90% of them are unreachable because they don't have phones or they don't have access to data, then how are we really expanding that market? So the conversation really starts with funding, but funding of one individual startup will not create that environment that is now research driven and training driven to be able to provide the larger market for that funded startups to participate in, and also to create that larger market for that funded startup to sell to and be able to get resources from. So the picture is much larger than funding. Funding is real critical. But I'm really hitting on this because the very first statement you made was like, funding is the lifeblood. I would like to say funding is just one vein. There are many other veins and arteries in the body of a startup.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Mr. Guobadia. But before I go, let me just also ask this. I mean, we have the acts and it has all these nice and good provisions, but the challenge is implementation. It's not yet been implemented. You'd also touched on that earlier. And so my question is, and what you touched on earlier rather was around, you said that the entirety of the acts was private sector driven. So we have this scenario now. What advice or what word do you have for founders or other people operating in the space to engage with government to ensure that the act is implemented?
So I would say very clearly that the very first step is understanding the act, right? So I think a lot of founders have not taken the time to embrace the act, understand what the act actually says. And I think once you do, you will see that there was a document that really was done to support, the environment, to support the ecosystem, to provide help to the ecosystem. I think once you now understand the act and you've now, internalized what the provisions are and understand what those provisions are intended to do for your business going forward, I would say the very next step is to demand that the act is implemented. I'm not using words that are nice. I'm not saying ask, I'm saying demand. And demand is because the people who have, in fact, I take a step back. The word demand only applied in maybe previous administrations. This particular administration is our administration, right? And the fact that the people who are sitting in positions from Lagos State is all people we know, to the federal government, they're all people we know from the ecosystem, right? Mm-hmm. So in this time, we have run out of excuses, right? In this very given time. In 4 years' time, 8 years' time, we still have the same complaints we have now. Somebody's going to laugh at us, right? Because in this time, we have a very unique opportunity to get it right. We have a legal document which has gone through our National Assembly, has been accepted by the previous president. We have a young minister who is an ecosystem builder and from the ecosystem. His entire team of TAs and SAs are all from the ecosystem. Most of the people who run the agencies that are under him are all from the ecosystem. We have run out of excuses. So in this time, like no other time, are we able to implement provisions of the Nigerian Startup Act and other provisions. If you look at SMIDN, there are a lot of things in it to help support startups. If you look at the Better Facilitation Act, there's a lot of things that, if you look at one of the provisions, just real quickly, in the Facilitation Act, it says that if you apply for something for federal government and it takes longer than 13 days, it's automatically approved. Exactly. And you are in legal practice. So we need to embrace these laws, right? These are laws. They are laws in our own country for us. And interesting enough, the for us by us, I don't know if we're the age group to understand what for us by us is, the FUBU thing, right? It was also done by a young person, relatively young, who also made the Facilitation Act happen, right? So if you imagine now, if you take the Nigerian Startup Act, which demands a portal for startups, and you take the Facilitation Act, which demands that whatever you ask for should be approved in 13 days, you now see the pressure for an NDA to deliver on your request within a very short period of time. And if you read in the Startup Act, you will see there's a tracking and monitoring and evaluation aspect of it that actually tracks and reports on things that are requested by startups in Nigeria from the portal. I think there alone, you can see how much problems are being solved just from that one small aspect. And we're not talking about the part of the act that does linkages, where it ties you to every single NDA, from exportation to free trade zones to taxes, you name it, to ensure that the Startup Act gets the resources from government that it requires. That's what's important about the Startup Act. That's why every founder who wants to do the business in Nigeria should understand what the act is saying, embrace the act, collaborate with other founders, and demand that the act is implemented as per the original framer's intentions.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Guobadia. I'll just say thank you to you once again. And I do hope that attendees are taking notes and that you are forming the necessary collaborations that may be required to push our agenda at the federal level. Let me just say, Mrs. Ali, what pitfalls will you recommend, or will you say that founders should try to avoid when they are seeking funding?
Thank you very much. I think it's quite similar to some of the things that we've discussed, not too far from some of the things that we've discussed earlier on. Number one would be to say that as founders, it is very, very important that you validate, there's a market validation. I mean, pilots, there's something, you're testing the market to see that your solution is solving a problem and people will be willing to pay for it. I think that's very, very important. That's the first thing. And another thing that, some of the pitfalls that, again, personally, where our issues at the initial stage of, even talking to people within the ecosystem, what we've also seen is the inability to communicate our value propositions very clearly as well. That's another thing, because if you're going to sell it, like I mentioned earlier, to an investor or to a funder, it is very, very important that you're very clear. And in talking about being clear, it means that you're telling them how you're different from others, like I mentioned earlier as well, how you're different from others. Another thing is, and I think somebody also mentioned it earlier, the failure to adapt. As founders, it is very, very important to know when to pivot, to tweak. The market is constantly changing. Consumers' preferences are always evolving. So it is very important to say that, to pay very close attention to all of these changes and be able to tweak and adjust your offerings to meet this demand. I think another issue is that a lot of times founders think that they are building for investors. It should be building for consumers, for the customers that we serve. The investors will guide us. You have their money. Yes, all you need to do is to be very transparent and loop them into what you're doing so that they have a clear understanding. But the most important person that is going to give you everything that you need to yield additional income, give ROI to your investor is the customer. So it's very, very important that as founders, we focus on the customers, conduct market research, understand what their needs are, understand how they are changing, their preferences are changing, and build products to solve those problems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Ali. Thank you for that. Mrs. Oladunjoye, and as we start to wind down, as we're running out of time, what will you say are the most significant opportunities and challenges for startups in Nigeria today?
Wow. So just to touch on this, I think Uncle Oswald and I we had breakfast the other day, a couple of weeks back, and we just, I'll say yes, access to funding, but then there are reasons why those, even if the funding was here, are all these startups ready to take the funding is another question. And just to add to the question that you asked, Seun, was one of the things I'll say to founders: don't take money just because of taking money's sake. Because once you take investors' money, you jump when they tell you to jump. So know why you're taking money and be very clear as to what you're doing with that money. So not to repeat regulations, what the challenges, like the regulations and adoption of the regulations that have been put in place are challenges. The macroeconomic factors, we have actually no control over that in terms of if you're an investor or if you're an entrepreneur. That's a challenge that we have to face all the time. Inflation, economic instability, currency fluctuations, these all pose problems for for startups and their financial planning and sustainability. When you also look at it in terms of you don't have as many, thank God for the likes of Olumide that are local funders, but most funders or most people that are funding, they're coming from the abroad. So you're taking money in dollars, but you're earning in naira. So how do you balance that? That is a challenge that entrepreneurs need to face. Again, understanding competition. There's a lot of competition. I'll say that, yes, fintech is saturated, but at the same time, it's not saturated because are you actually dealing with the problem? And I think Uncle Oswald made mention of it, where he says, an opportunity will say, we've got a really huge market size, 200 million plus population. However, the population can they access your solution? It's an opportunity, yet it's a challenge. So you think about infrastructural limitations. We want to do forward-thinking things. You want to be using AI that in Nigeria we're still crawling. We want to use the AI of people that are flying. make it make sense. Security concerns. So as an investor, you have all these things to look at when you're thinking of, okay, I'm going to come and invest. But there's always there's a silver lining. Where there's a problem, then you can find a solution. And when you find a solution that people want, or there's a demand for that solution, you drive value, then money will follow. So I'll say yes, our large growing population, but let's also think about it in terms of digital penetration. I'll say it's exciting that you're having the mobile and internet penetration. Again, during our lunch conversation or breakfast conversation, we're talking about, people that are actually innovating fast enough and providing, should I say, phones that are not iOS or Android, but can make use of these innovations that were developing on the continent. Financial innovation, how fast is it's evolving on our continent. I think Nigeria has a significant agricultural sector, but we're not tapping into it as much as we can. So there's an opportunity there. Renewable energy is something that, green climate funding, if you're now providing renewable energy or clean energy, I think even Feds are doing that, where they've put it to electric, cars and all the rest of it. Those are opportunities. And just going back to what Olumide has said at the beginning is, when you have these problems, you can be looking for solutions, and those solutions can be on any vertical. It could be healthcare, it could be agri-tech, it could be, anything. And then I like the idea of, a lot of people are looking into actually investing in the ecosystem. When I say investing, where you have the emergence of tech hubs, incubators, accelerators, like Techstars have come to Nigeria. So the more you build on it, that you're providing the support that is required for the ecosystem, you're providing the mentorship that's required for the ecosystem, resources to the startups and funding to the startups. I think it then means that we have an ecosystem that is fostering innovation and collaboration that we can build on. But again, I'm conscious that we're at time. It's 4:00, so let me stop here.
Already, thank you so very much, Mrs. Oladunjoye. I'm just going to run through the questions so that we can leave here in good time. And what I'll do is to take the ones that are addressed to specific panelists first, and then if we have the time, we can then take others. The first one here is to Mrs. Ali. It says, are there specific challenges that women-led startups face in securing funding?
Yes, I'll say yes. But again, yes, but it was a bit different for us, to be honest, at first. Because first of all, we tried to look for funders who would invest in females, ladies, and we approached them. So we also tried to check the history of the investors that we were looking at, and how they've invested in female-led businesses as well. So while I'm aware that these challenges existed, I would say that it wasn't so, we didn't have to deal with that much because we identified the people that we wanted to speak to and just went for them. But I've also had conversations with other founders, female founders who had a totally different experience. And because we are women as well, you have to show up. You have to double your efforts just to prove a point, to say that I can really do this. I'm what's investing in. But thank God for all our investors, Voltron, Olumide Soyombo, Ventures Platform. They saw beyond Techstars, Google. They saw beyond the gender and looked at the problem that we were solving, and decided to take a bet on us.
Thank you so much. The person who asked the question was anonymous, but I hope that question was answered. Next, I want to take a question from Onyeka Mwobu, and this question is addressed to both Mrs. Oladunjoye and Mr. Soyombo. The person says, you both spoke about coachability and teachability. Beyond financial funding, what are the top or key areas that you have observed that founders need support, and they define support as coaching and mentorship? And how do you, as investors, go about providing such support with localized context? I don't know who would like to go first.
There you go first.
Sure. Thank you. I think the key thing you find, right, especially in our markets, is think about a startup that's trying to collaborate with MTN, for example, right, for distribution. And you have invested $20,000 in that company for one reason, in funding in that company. You find that even your network to open that door to MTN for collaboration is even worth more than the 20K that you have invested in that company, apart from financial funding. So what you find is that early pre-seed investors and angels open up their network, and those are the key things to look for in a pre-seed firm, a pre-seed VC firm, or even an angel you want to invest. Yes, you're giving me money, well, how can I access your network that can then extend my distribution or give me some collaboration that you need. So I think that's the first thing you find. The second thing you find too is, and I mean, I've seen some comments from founders talking about VCs, saying VCs typically should earn the right to advise, right? Vinod Khosla said he has some analysts and partners in his firm that he doesn't even give opinions and sit on boards in his VC firm, and Coastal Ventures is one of the biggest VC firms. And he said, yes, because you went to HBS and you went to some of these top schools, doesn't mean that you can advise and sit on the board and advise a founder on how to build a high growth startup. And his own thesis then comes from the point of view that building a company is hard. And if you're working with an investor who has built a company before, then you should be leaning on that investor to gain insights on, because you've not done it before, right? How do I hire? How do I fire? How do I build a team? How do I create a structure? Those are things that we sit down with founders to help founders understand. How are they building? How do you even sell? You find out that many people sit down behind the laptop in the office, but your customers are on the streets, right? How do you build that hustle? How do you build the sales process, a pipeline, and so on? So it's really the key things around building, from the experience of building before, the key things around expanding your network. And like I said, sometimes you find out that those things are very, very important, even sometimes more important than cash. That's not to say cash is not important.
May I? So, just to buttress what Olumide has said, so I'll say, when I sit at Endeavour Nigeria, a lot of people think, oh yes, we give money, but what we actually do is give you a platform. And the platform is giving you access to mentorship, and mentorship where it's different phases of life, or should I say different areas of business, that you have access to that. That oftentimes is even more important than money. And I think going back to what I said is, you think, oh, I want to raise funds, like it's a new thing to do, and it might not actually be funding that you need at the time. Mentorship, access to markets. So Olumide mentioned it. So if I'm giving you access to market to grow your business, then you can show that, okay, your pilot worked and now you do have a business case, or you have a minimum viable product, and you can blow it out. Understanding branding and positioning yourself in the market is another important thing that a lot of startups might not even take, they're not interested in. Some people are making noise and it's just fluff, where you don't hear about some people and they really, head down and actually doing the nitty-gritty of the work that needs to be done before they blow. And you think, oh, they're overnight successes, where they're not. But I'll say on top of it, in terms of what I would say that founders need to listen, and also don't be so should I say, emotional about your solution. You should be more attached to the problem you're trying to solve, and make sure you're malleable enough, or you pivot enough to actually solve that problem, depending on what environment you're in. That is what I'll say. I hope that the person that asked the question is satisfied with the information we've given.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soyombo and Mrs. Oladunjoye. I'm just going to take one or two more before we call it a day. There's one I'm looking at here that I presume is also addressed to the investors on the panel. And the question says, as startups progress through various funding rounds, there's often a shift in the expectation of investors. How can founders effectively manage and communicate these evolving expectations to ensure transparency and maintain a positive relationship with the investors, especially during challenging phases or pivots in the business strategy?
May I, Olumide? So I think Olumide made mention of when founders go quiet, and it also depends on the type of investor you have. You have investors that want to hold your hands, that want to be interested in what your problems are. He also made mention that you've been there. These investors have been there, done that. So there's no new problem under the sun that they will not be able to solve. But when you're a founder, you kind of like you stick your head in the sand as opposed to asking or notifying and informing your investors. Don't wait till it's already gone belly up before founders are coming. I think Seun made mention of it. Make sure you align in terms of your mission and the type of investors you're having on your cap table. So there's some investors and I think update your investors regularly so that they can navigate it for you, or point you in the right direction of what you need to do, which also leads to being teachable, being able to listen, being able to communicate what the problems are. And yes, at different stages, I think when people get it to their Series A, they think, oh yes, they're going to go and get money. But the higher you go, the harder it is to get the money. And the should I say, the more painful the whip that you're going to get is because then there's more, those investors they're more bloody, should I, for lack of a better word, they're more dog-head. They're not your angel investors. You've already proved, and then your market size might be getting less, and you need to prove, you need to prove more of a point, or you need to work harder, or you need to acquire companies that are doing the same thing as you. So these are things that I think startups or entrepreneurs are not thinking about when they're going out to get funding or changing to the type of investors you're having. Voltron Capital is totally different from when you're going to TLCom, But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Now that I think about it, I don't think it's necessarily a question for the investors on the panel, actually. And I'll just say any other member of the panel that has something to say around this. The question again is around how do you manage change in investor expectations as you go through the funding rounds or in a position where you're undertaking a pivot? If your investors, if there's a misalignment, the investors are expecting something, they're thinking something, and you're thinking something else. How can founders effectively manage and communicate the evolving expectations to ensure transparency and a positive relationship? Mr. Guobadia or Mrs. Ali, if you'd have anything to contribute to that.
The ladies first, or should I just go? So I would say that pivots don't happen instantaneously. It's not an overnight type of thing. You basically grow into a pivot. The market is changing, things are changing, dynamics are changing. The original math is no longer mathing, so you have to now add a different kind of math to it. I think this speaks to what Olumide was saying earlier when he said that when you stop getting updates from a startup or investee, then you know something is wrong. That's a clear indication something is wrong. Now, those of us who have built businesses in Nigeria, I'm myself for close to 2 decades, nothing fancy, very much on the infrastructure side of things. I can tell you that one of the things about entrepreneurship is that it makes you think that you're alone. Now, only you to do this thing. This thing that's happening right now is only you. But the truth of the matter is just a cash flow problem. And your cash flow problem will change year on year on. I remember there was a time when I used to call friends for 500K to get APG. And then a couple of years later, it's 5 million. Another years, it's 200, 300. And the numbers start to change on what really is your whole. But at the end of the day, it's just a whole. And I can tell you as I stand now, I'm now bored with it because I've now realized, looking across the span, that these things that give me these emotional spikes is just the same thing over and over again. It's just bigger, or sometimes smaller, but bigger. So I think, to take it right back to your question, by the time you need to pivot what your business is doing, you would already know because you are in that business, and you should keep the communication with your investor as part of developing that relationship. You should have a mentor that you are speaking to who has an idea of the environment you're working in. You should be reading books because business is a science. It's not an art form. It's a science which you do some artistic things on top of. So it's critical that you understand that you need to have this conversation. You need to read to get a sense of what. So I give an example. I went to a meeting. This is about 100 years ago. Some HBS guys had this event, and they invited a professor from Harvard. And the guy was talking about cash conversion circles. And, I think, I got the anointing that night. It was like it was a shiver of understanding what I've been going through when it comes to cash conversion circles, which is pretty much where you get money and when you pay other people. What is that time span you save in the middle there before you pay out, right? Amazon is famous for having 90 days. We have companies in Nigeria that can really destroy your business by having things that don't make sense. Half a year, 6 months, you're chasing payments. Those cash conversion circles can break any business, regardless of how funded you are, because no business is built to not get your money in a quick time. But hearing that professor talk about cash conversion circles gave me such insight that I now understood how to manage my business better. So it's very important that we are engaging with other people, who are speaking with the investors, to understand what is happening in our business, because a pivot doesn't happen instantaneously. It's something that happens very slowly. And by the time you make that decision that you're going to change how the business is operating as per how you describe it to your investor, it will happen over time. And it will just be bad behavior on your part that you have not been communicating these changes and these feelings that you're having as you're driving that business.
Thank you very much, sir.
I mean, not to overflog what they've said, but I think it all goes back to communication, which everyone has also spoken to. Is first of all, it's very important that you know have like a clear vision and mission of the kind of investors that you want to have on your cap table, such that when you have problems, there is no apprehension, you don't have that anxiety of communicating and sharing what the challenges are to them. It's fine to also understand as founders that there will be bad days. We always want to be high flyers. Some of us are very dogged. I want to record an A every day, but some days you probably will be an F, and it's fine to just, when you have the right people on your team as investors, then you just go back to them. It's not profiting this month, but these are the things that we've put in place to ensure that we hit our numbers next month, and they can even guide you and put you through on things that you can do to even get it right. So I think it's being open-minded and understand that it's not going to be all rosy.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Mr. Soyombo is with us. If he can also just give a comment on this, and then we will round off. Yes, Mr. Soyombo.
I think the key thing is communication, right? I've been on the blind side before, where a company had invested in based on a certain thesis, changed what he was doing, and I found out on Tech About. And they said, I know that this is the thing that would work, and so on and so forth. But and then I found out that other investors also didn't know. So it wasn't just about me. Other investors also didn't know, but he felt that what he was doing was going to be way bigger. And after all, I'm going to make money for you. So why do I need to tell you? And why are you complaining? You get my point. And that's really that's really not the issue. Yes, you might go ahead to pivot and make it better and make something big out of it, but that doesn't change that bad behavior is bad behavior, right? So yes. I think Seun captured the key essence, which is communication, right? At the end of the day, at the early and pre-seed stage, you're still the majority shareholder in that business, right? Even most times, those of the investors are only safe note holders. So you can still bully your way through that decision if you want to. But at least the investor would have told you their own views. And since you have taken money from them, the idea is that you should respect that also, and respect capital and respect their views because of that. But not the key issue. I think the underlying thing then becomes communication. I think that's really the all in all in that matter. So communicate and communicate.
And to the person who asked the question, I hope you've noted all the panelists all spoke around communication. I hope that your question is answered. That will bring us to the end of this webinar. We do still have a number of questions, but we are 17 minutes outside of the time allotted, and we don't want to take any more time from our speakers. That said, I would like to say a very big thank you to all the panelists. Thank you so very much, Mrs. Ali, Mrs. Oladunjoye. Thank you, Mr. Soyombo and Mr. Guobadia. We are thankful that when we called out to you, you heeded our call. Thank you so very much. Thank you to everybody who's joined. I do hope that you've learned, and that certain questions that may have been burning on your mind have been answered. A very big thank you to everyone. Clearly, like I said, there are questions that we've still not yet answered, and what this points to is that we could be here another hour and we'll just keep going. So I don't know if there's been some comments even in the Q&A around us making introductions to the speakers. Those are things that we'll subsequently discuss with the panelists, and subject to their permission, we may then make those introductions to everybody.
I'm going to plug, if you're building something interesting, reach out to Olumide at Voltron.africa.
Oh, that's very
it's not my BVN. I can give it out.
Okay. So Olumide at Voltron.com.africa.
.africa. Olumide at Voltron.africa. Yeah.
Okay, so if you're building something interesting, you want to shoot your shot at Mr. Soyombo, please have at it. Thank you so much, everyone. We host our next webinar. Thank you, sir and madam.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.